Hello! We're ready to start our first row of knitting with the Yoga Socks free pattern on the Yarnspirations website. Peyton's Croy Socks, Yoga Socks to knit. Alright, we've got everything cast on, we're joined in the round, and we're ready to knit our first row. So it says to work 10 rounds in knit 1, purl 1 ribbing. A round means that you go all the way around. So that means I'm going to have to go around 10 times. So I'm going to show you just one row. One round, I mean. It's not a row anymore since we're working in the round. So we just knit a stitch, pull the yarn forward, purl a stitch, take the yarn back, knit a stitch, bring the yarn forward, purl a stitch, and that's what you do over and over again. You knit a stitch, you purl a stitch, and always remember to take the yarn back for the knits and bring the yarn forward for the purls. After a while you'll start to just get a flow and it won't be hard to do. So I'm going to make it all the way across this needle so that I can show you what happens when you get to the end of the needle. Sorry for the scratchy sound, it's the bottom of those points scratching against the table. And if you ever get confused and you say, did I just knit or did I purl? You can look at the stitch that you just finished, because you know the doorbell might ring or the phone might ring or something and you get pulled away. If you come back and look at the stitches that you just worked, pull the bottom section down a little bit and you'll be able to see these little sections where the yarn comes across the stitch I mean. See the yarn going straight across? That's a purl. That's where you work the purl. And where you don't see that happening, that was a stitch that you just knitted. So you can look at your last stitch and you can see the yarn going across, straight across. So that was a purl that you just worked. So now I'm ready for a knit. Another thing you can do is just to count by 2. You go knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl. And that way you'll know for sure that you're ready for a knit stitch now. It's easy to get sidetracked if you have to set it down and you don't want your ribbing to get messed up. Ribbing is the part of a knitted garment that will hug up against your body, and it keeps it from sliding off. You'll see that like on a sleeve of a sweater, right at the cuff. You'll see that lots of times. Or you'll see it on a pair of socks, like what we're making. It's the ribbing that holds it on. So now I've finished the first needle and I'm ready to go to the next needle. So the needle that was holding all of those stitches is in my left hand now. It's empty. So that's the needle that I need to switch over to the right hand now. And now I'm going to use it to knit the stitches off of the next needle. And that's how it works for double pointed needles. So now I'm going to knit, purl, and it'll work this way all the way around the whole round. So like I said, after a while it gets a nice flow to it and it's not hard to do it all because you're really only using 2 needles at a time. The other needles are just holding the stitches that you're going to be working on next. Some people get nervous about working with double pointed needles, but it's not hard once you get used to it. And there's one more thing that I do when I use double points, is my right needle is down underneath the other needle and my left needle is underneath the needle like that. It makes it easier because they have more room to move like this. If I'm going to flip it over and let you see, if it's like that, If the needles are on top of the needles you were working on before, then it's harder to work because you have these points in the way. So bring them in between those other points. And it'll make your life easier. Now this is the advice I'm giving you is just for my style of knitting. Now for continental knitting, where you're picking the stitches instead of wrapping, you might want to hold the needles a different way. But if you wrap the stitches like I do, this is the way to do it. Alright, so now I'm ready for a knit. So there's you some advice for working your first 10 rounds. And when you get to the end of this round, you'll be able to tell you're at the end because you'll see that tail hanging down from the yarn where you first cast on. See the tail down there? That's the tail that we used when we did our cast on. So I still have to work all the way around this needle and all the way down to that needle. Then when I get to that tail, I know I finished round 1. And when I finish round 1, I'll make a little mark on my pattern up here. And that way I'll know I need to do 9 more rounds after that. So knitting is a very organized craft. If you're not an organized person, I think that knitting helps you become a more organized person. So now I've finished 2 needles. I'm ready for my 3rd needle. That tail down because it will get twisted around in there. It's always good to start each needle with a knit stitch. It just works easier than trying to start a new needle with a purl stitch. It's been the case from my experience anyway. So that's why the pattern told you to arrange the stitches on the needles the way they said. You have 20 on the first needle, 20 on the second needle, and 24 on the third needle. You always have an even number. So you always end with a purl stitch. And you always start each needle with a knit stitch. And that's another way to double check and make sure that you're doing your stitches properly. Now if you happen to knit, here I'll show you. If you happen to knit 2 in a row like this, and then you're like, oh my gosh, I did knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, knit! Ah! The world is not going to end. You have to learn how to tink. And tinking is just doing a knit stitch backwards. So I've got some other videos that'll show that more clearly. But to learn how to tink, it helps you to really pay close attention to how you knit a stitch. So when you knit a stitch, you know, you go in like that, and then you wrap it and you pull that forward. So if you do it real slow, then you'll see what you need to do to make it go in reverse. You just unwrap it and you pull that needle out. So I'm knitting now, pull it through, and then to tink I just need to get that back up in there, unwrap it, and take it off. So that's how to do an undo a knit stitch. So now I can show you how to undo a purl stitch. I'm going to purl 2 in a row by accident. So, oh my god, I have 2 purls! So, to undo a purl, you just stick your needle back into that stitch again. Bring the point forward, unwrap it, take it off. So everything goes in reverse. So once again, just study a purl stitch real slow. Notice how you wrap, and notice how you push it forward. So to undo a purl, you'd be pulling it back, and you'd be unwrapping and pulling your needle out. So I call, you know, everybody calls to undo a knit a tink, because it's knit spelled backwards. K-N-I-T-T-I-N-K. There's no word for purling, undoing a purl, so I call it lerping, even though it's not spelled like that. I just like to call it lerping, because it's actually lerping, and that's impossible to say, so I say lerping. Tinking and lerping. So you're knitting and purling, or tinking and lerping. So if you want to feel confident about your project and make sure that you can knit and purl and tink and lerp, you'll be happier. That way you can undo things one stitch at a time if you need to. And then when you get to that last stitch, there's that tail hanging down. So what I like to do is I pull it snug right there. And now I'm ready for round 2. So I can write with my pencil a little hash mark right there. 1 hash mark. Because it says work 10 rounds and knit 1 purl 1 ribbing. So I'll just make 1 little hash mark. Another thing you can do is just to use your stitch marker, your row counter. That thing. You can just turn it. Now you know you've done 1 round. You can sit it right there. And then come back later and work round 2. So, that's how we do our first 10 rounds. I will see you in the next video when we have finished those 10 rounds. And we'll be starting the next section. Talk to you later. Bye.